Good evening and welcome to the very first episode of the Hamilton Report. I'm Scott J. Hamilton, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and I could not be more thrilled than to be with you this evening. And I'm glad that you are here, and I hope that you will make plans to join us every Monday evening at 7 o'clock. See, this broadcast is actually in response to Democrats from around Oklahoma who said, we want to know more about issues. And so for half an hour every Monday evening, we are going to be looking at the issues and talking to people who are important to Oklahoma Democrats and Democrats around the country. So that being said, it's my great privilege to introduce to you this evening our first guest in the broadcast and our first guest in this program, because I wanted to start with something that all of us can recognize as an issue here in Oklahoma, and that is the death penalty. Our guest this evening is a true community leader, someone who I truly admire. He has been a great influence to his family, certainly, but beyond that, to young people in general. He graduated from John Marshall High School here in Oklahoma City, went on to play basketball at Grambling State, where he finished there and moved on to OCU, where he ended his basketball career as he earned an undergrad degree in finance and an MBA. He has certainly put those degrees to good use over the last 16 years in corporate finance. But that's not why he's here tonight. Instead, our guest is here because he has been the voice, the lead in justice for Julius. I'm talking about Julius Jones, who has been now on death row for 20 years for a crime that he was arrested for and convicted of. And yet many, many people question the veracity of that ruling. And certainly no one can speak to that better than our guest this evening. So with that being said, I'm very, very happy to welcome to our program this evening, Jimmy Lawson. Jimmy, welcome. I'm glad that you're here tonight.
Welcome. I appreciate you, man. It's an honor and a privilege to not only be on the Hamilton Report show, but to be the first guest of this amazing platform and vision, man, that you have. It's an honor.
Well, like I said at the beginning, there's a reason why I invited you to be a part of this particular show, our first show. I should have mentioned that in addition to all the other things that I talked about in your introduction, you are also one incredibly gifted orator. I have had the opportunity to hear you preach, and what an amazing message you have, particularly for young people, but one that resonates certainly with even older guys like me. So that was our first actual introduction. But since then, we've been following each other closely in the work that I'm doing, the work that you're doing, and it's your work I want to talk about. First of all, when I think about it, there were only two African American men that graduated the year that you did from John Marshall High School in the top 10% of their class. One was you, and the other was Julius Jones. Let's talk about how it is that after all of these years, not only have you remained friends with Julius, but also, Jimmy, how you have stood by him and lifted him up in such a way that everyone around the country knows that name.
Yeah, it's an honor and a privilege, man, to be able to come from a north side of Oklahoma City in a demographic culture where, the African-American male wasn't really a big deal, if you will. So for Julius and myself to be able to come in this particular area of the city and be able to acquire 3.9 GPA coming out of John Marshall High School, it was virtually unheard of back in that time. So kudos to my foundation and my family and the Jones family, both believing in the core values of how to be successful academically. So, I got to give a shout out to both of these phenomenal families, man. They built us for who we are today. When all this transpired with Julius coming out of 99, I viewed it like a brother, like a true brother of mine. We thought alike. We had all the same interests. His potential was unlimited. One of the first African-American males to ever go to OU on a full academic scholarship back in the 90s. You and I know, Scott, back in the 90s, the demographics for OU were primarily athletes, at the University of Oklahoma that were African American. So
That's correct.
For Julius Jones to step into campus as an academia was definitely groundbreaking, man. So we knew that his potential was unlimited, and his future, man, was whatever he wanted to be. So when all that transpired, I took it upon myself at the time to figure out that, what, he could really be anybody. He could be my brother, my cousin, my friend, my next door neighbor, your relative. He could be anybody.
He could be you.
He could be me. We could be flip-flopping. That was the mantra, over the past 20 years that I kind of took, like, what, that could be me. And if that was me, who would be a voice for me? Who would stand up for me? Because you and I know behind those closed walls, it's a different world. It's a different ball game, specifically when you're on death row. So I knew that, and I said, you know what? The good word says about how we are to protect our fellow brethren and how to stand up for true justice. So I took it a challenge upon myself, man, to just try to use any resource that I had available, man, to use my voice to help him out.
Jimmy, I'm going to take you back to the beginning here, because you said when all that transpired. For the benefit of our viewers, let's go all the way back to the beginning and what exactly happened.
Sure. So in the summer of 1999, me and Julius kind of reconnected. I was at Grambling State University. He was at OU. So we reconnected, played some basketball over the summer. Around July 28th of 1999, a gentleman by the name of Paul Howard gets murdered in Edmond, Oklahoma. This gentleman was a white male. The hypothetical suspect at the time was a black African-American male. They didn't have a lot of information right off the bat, but the county and law enforcement was already seeking out whoever this person is. We're shooting for the death penalty. They're going to pay. They're going to fry, as they say. So the culture back then is important because the demographics for Edmond looks much different than it does now. Back then it was 95% white. There weren't a lot of blacks and or other minorities in Edmond. So that was kind of a key element in this culture, if you will, under Bob Macy, the DA at the time. So when all that transpired, a gentleman by the name of Christopher Jordan, a guy who actually was one of our teammates in high school, was hanging around Julius a little bit at the time. Scott, really honestly, man, I saw them a time or two at the house kind of hanging. We all played ball together. But I really never thought much of it, to be honest, just some guys hanging around. So when that murder took place, we actually stayed 4 or 5 houses down from each other. I was coming home from work 2 days after this murder took place, and they had my whole block blocked off, county sheriff, ATF, SWAT team, you name it, they were there. So I couldn't get in. I happened to talk to Oklahoma County Sheriff, and I'm kind of looking at the street and trying to figure out what's really going on, because it didn't occur to me. And I'll tell you why it didn't occur to me, because the demographics of our neighborhood at the time was around 65% white, 35% black. So naturally, Scott, I'm thinking, based on my statistics, they're probably looking for a white guy. That was just natural, right? Because the numbers were that much bigger than what we had in black representation. But the guy comes up to me and he says, you know what? We're looking for the guy that committed the murder in Edmond. His name is Julius Jones. And it was like somebody taking a balloon and blowing it up and then letting all the air out. I could feel it in my stomach, like, hold on. Are you talking about my friend Julius Jones? And he's like, yes, sir. And I was like, I couldn't believe it, Scott. First of all, I couldn't believe that this particular murder, my friends being looked for this particular murder. And then, wow, in my neighborhood, this is actually happening. So, they surrounded the Joneses' house. And what was very unique about this whole ordeal was the amount of law enforcement looking for one guy. Up until this point in my lifetime, I only saw this in the movies, right? So when I'm watching this live and direct, I cannot believe the amount of law enforcement and the Jones family telling law enforcement, hey, we're going to be straight up honest. Julius is not in the house. From that standpoint, Scott, you think, okay, well, that's probably true. As a man and as a family with integrity, I'm probably not going to hide the fact if my son is in the house or not. This is kind of how it is, right? So they were real honest. Hey, he's not here. But they decided to make a statement out of the Jones family house. And you saw the pictures and the videos. It looked like a tornado, came in through the house. And
they literally tore that house apart.
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. My dad and I are standing next to each other looking like, this looks like the movies. It was that bad.
So this was 2 days after the murder. They go in and they come out finally after all of these law enforcement officials were trooping through the house. They came out with a bandana. And according to what I understand, there wasn't much real detective work done. They found something. They said, okay, this ties him directly to the murder. But even years have gone by now, and with new DNA testing, and what they have found is that the stain on that bandana had 4 contributors to it, haven't they?
That's correct. So, it turned out to be more complex, than what we thought. We have more questions than we do answers now about, the results of the bandana, because it's been so long. And like you said, there's multiple contributors. And then there was no saliva found on the bandana as well. And we know, you and I, if we have a bandana over our face for X amount of time, we're going to have some type of saliva found on the bandana. So that was a trigger within itself. So at the end of the day, when we start reading through the results, everybody was saying, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So now the general public is questioning the fact of, is it really the real bandana?
See, therein lies the question. The general public is asking that, but what about the prosecutor?
Yeah, so, the prosecutor, which is really the attorney general at this time, his standpoint was the total opposite. He had a press conference a few weeks ago giving out some information about what he thought being a representation of the Howe family, which I found to be a little odd, because I'm not a lawyer, but from my perspective, I think an elected official should always be unbiased and what we call equitable when it comes to pursuing justice in any type of case for the state of Oklahoma. So for him to provide a lot of information that was false, that was very concerning and alarming, especially to myself and the Jones family and all of our attorneys and all of our supporters. So, Scott, what was really, really strange is that after his press conference, people were really confused about what's really going on.
I'm one of those people, because I was more confused after the press conference than I was before, Jimmy.
Right. So, at the end of the day, I will make the statement that, all the allegations that this particular press conference made about Julius having robbing pizza parlors, having loaded weapons, and all of the other allegations are 100% false. So he's never been tried and or convicted on any of those particular allegations that the Attorney General was referencing to.
So it's my understanding, and it's just hard for me to believe that this is the case, but there are attorneys now working on Julius' behalf who indicate that the district attorney has in his possession a file that has never, ever been examined by any attorney representing Julius. And they cannot make sense of why he won't release it unless there's something that he's hiding.
That's a very great question. We've been fighting for quite some time, specifically our attorneys, of trying to get their hands on this particular file. And that is the magical question, Scott, is why is not the file available? And that is the $1 million question.
Where you are right now in your life, 20 years after the fact, you have built a life with your family, a life in your community, When you speak to Julius, how is he doing? How does he wake up and go through his day every day, knowing that he is an innocent man, claiming that from day one, and still remains on death row? How do you find him when you talk to him, Jimmy?
I'll talk a little bit about where he is now and where he was, what I call pre and post the last offense. We spent many years of trying to do the 3 appeals in the state of Oklahoma, which were all denied. Of course, we know that. So before we had this amazing opportunity to have his story told in the last offense, Julius at the time was down. He was hopeless. He felt like nobody wanted to hear his story. Nobody was giving him a chance to provide the facts on his side of the fence. So it was in a dark moment, and I'm very honest about where he was mentally and as a man, being in a cell 23 hours per day, barely able to see sunlight, can affect one's ability to have hope, specifically in this predicament where you're sitting on death row. So the good forces and God's ability, man, provided a miracle for Julius, which Viola Davis, major love and shout out to her and her production company for choosing Mr. Jones's case to shoot a 3-hour documentary, man. When we got the call from ABC, it was one of those, wow, this is the moment, we've been waiting for. And when Julius found out that it got chosen, I said, hey, man, this is it. This is what we've been searching. This is what we've been praying for. This is the moment. So we knew that this was our last opportunity to give us the best shot to tell the real facts about the story. So once the story hit, I told him, I said, hey, man, this is going to make you global. He's like, no, I'm so concerned. You got to keep in mind that Julius's mindset and body was still in the 90s. I like to paint that picture because we are living and we're moving on. But Julius is kind of still stuck in 1999.
Well, sure. I mean, what else does he have to compare it to?
Exactly. So he's like, man, this and that with the system and the culture. I was like, listen, dude, it's totally different. It's been 20 years. You got to believe me. People are going to believe what they watch. Trust me. So it hit Scott the first week. Julius gets about 700 letters. First week, people were hitting me with requests so fast, man, my fingers was on fire. I couldn't keep up. Just like, man, this is crazy. So he gets this stack of letters and he calls me and says, Jimmy, you're right. People believe in my innocence. I said, I told you. But to hear him with a tone of hope, Scott, with a tone of reassurance that I really have a chance to make it out of this nightmare. What a feeling for me and the family to hear that voice of hope from Mr. Jones, because that's not what it sounded like, before the show hit. It was a voice of desperation in a tone of, I don't know how this is going to work out. So the last offense, Scott, changed Julius's dynamic, and we're so thankful to ABC.
Well, ABC reported about Julius on 2020. They've updated that story since then. Tell us where things are right now. You're talking about the hopefulness that you hear when you speak to Julius today. But what is the next step in finding justice for your friend?
Yeah, so where we are currently, so let me backtrack to October of 2019. Kind of our last silver bullet, if you will, is what we call clemency. So we chose to go the commutation route and do a clemency petition with the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board, which is a 5-board member. They have the authority to hear commutation petitions. So we filed it in October, and it was really cool because the same day that we filed, Kim Kardashian jumped on board as a supporter. So what better way to have a national platform like Kim Kardashian? In my opinion, that took what we had as what I call a mini movement, and it took it to a whole different level. So once we found that, the process is that the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board has the capacity to hear the petition. Once they do so, they'll have the ability to vote yes or no. to hear the particular petition. We hope they say yes, and it'll move to phase two. Phase two, the process is more in depth of the presentation of why he's innocent, which is provided by our attorneys and probably Julius himself. If the board votes yes for that, it will go to phase three, which is pretty much the recommendation to our Governor Stitt. And then our Governor Stitt has the last authority to approve or deny his release.
Have you had any conversations with the governor to this point, Jimmy?
You know, not me personally. We've had some other folks that's what we call intermediaries that's probably had some conversations along that line. Here's the tricky part, Scott, is that, you know, we're stuck in this, what I'll call like middle zone with all this drama that's been taking place on the pardon and parole board. And you've done some tweeting on that, you've done some posting on that, and it's blowing people away about the political stuff that goes behind what I think is just such a simple process.
Threatening each other on the board.
You know, that's like you, Scott, walking up to your boss and say, "Hey, man," or "Hey, lady, it's time for you to go." Right?
Yeah, that wouldn't go over real well.
Yeah, that's probably not going to be very successful. So I'm looking and watching and reading, Scott, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen a dynamic where a board member, you know, threatens the executive director to get out of Dodge. That's just unheard of.
And yet here we are, Oklahoma politics at its finest.
Here we are.
We're going to be talking in a few weeks about criminal justice reform, Jimmy, and what that means for community. But I'd like for you to talk a little bit, if you would, about Julius's family. I had the pleasure just right before COVID of meeting his mom and giving her a big hug. But talk a little bit about what it's like for them and how they keep on hoping for true justice for their son, their brother.
Yeah, you know, the Jones family, I always tell people, man, it's probably one of the most strongest spiritual families that I know, and particularly Mrs. Jones. You know, she's got that old school backbone of, you know, no matter what is going on the outside, I'm going to believe internally with my faith that God is going to bring my son home. And, you know, I don't know too many people that probably could deal with something of this nature. Let's keep it real. 21 years is basically a whole lifetime. You know, there's people who are 21 years old that are passing away. So that's a whole lifetime. So for her and Mr. Jones to have that much hope and faith, you know, in their Lord and Savior, to say, you know what, we're not going to give up. As long as we are in the ball game, we're not going to give up. So, you know, when you look at Mr. and Mrs. Jones and Antoinette and Tony, you know, you get sucked into that positive energy of, you know, if they're believing, certainly I got to believe too. And then when you see how they conduct themselves when adversity comes, such as some of the Attorney General press conference, they have an even keel, as I say, and they are continuing to keep their eyes on the prize, Scott. And we know the eye on the prize is that Julius has got to come home.
And Jimmy, they're remarkable. The family is, and I would be remiss though if I didn't say thanks to you, because there's no doubt that your continued love, your continued support has obviously meant a lot to Julius, but also to his family. And I can talk about the larger community as well. What you're talking about tonight is something that could affect every single Oklahoman. Because when we get up in the morning, we have our little plan. Sometimes it's just walking from the bedroom into our office, which is now the kitchen or the dining room or the living room. But we have a plan, and we don't think about something as horrifying as this happening to someone that we love and we care about. And yet it's something that we all have to think about, because it could just as easily, as we said before, it could have been you, it could have been me, it could have been any one of us. And that leads me to our last question here. Where do we go with the death penalty in Oklahoma, Jimmy? What do you see? What would you like to have happen? And what message would you like to share with people about Oklahoma's death penalty?
Right off the top, man, the death penalty has to go. If there's any inclination of a reasonable doubt, there's no way that we could put a human being's life at stake and possibly take their life, because and I know that death is irrevocable. We can't reverse it. If we find out someone's innocent after the fact, we can't reverse that decision. And because of that little nuance, you got to get rid of it. What I would like to see is a third party. I think the state of Pennsylvania implemented, Philadelphia in particularly implemented what we call a third party intermediary firm that does their own investigations post conviction. That's something I think that would totally change the ball game for Department of Corrections, because it gives a unbiased agency and or entity that will look at each case to make sure that all the T's were crossed and all the I's were dotted. You and I know that because human beings does make mistakes, without a doubt, that tells you and I that there are some innocent people sitting behind jail. That's the way the system goes, because we're humans. We will make mistakes. And because of that, we have to get rid of the death penalty, Scott.
I was looking at commutations in Oklahoma over the years, and the number of people who were on death row who it was later determined that they were not guilty of the crime for which they were charged and convicted. And so this opens, I hope, a big dialogue for people in Oklahoma. And now that the nation is back to capital punishment again, I hope it's a conversation that we have on a bigger level. I'm delighted that you were able to be with us this evening, Jimmy, because your story is a part of Julius's story. And ultimately, I think that each one of us is made up of parts of all of the other people in our lives. And for all that you've done, I salute you. I have such tremendous respect for you. And I hope that you'll come back and visit with us again. Is that a promise?
Oh, that's a promise.
And I'm gonna tell you what, I can't. One show you have got to commit to, and that is that the day that Julius leaves the prison as a free man, that you will make sure and drag him onto this program with you.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, we're gonna run you over, Scott. We're ready.
Jimmy, thanks again for being with us, and we'll talk to you real soon. Okay, brother?
Yes, sir. I appreciate you, brother.
You too. I hope that this conversation stirred some thinking on your part. Maybe you've been forever supportive of the death penalty, but perhaps this gives you a reason to give it a little more thought, or perhaps you've always been against it. Maybe this is the time that you can really sink your teeth in and work more closely with other people who are interested in abolishing the death penalty here in Oklahoma. I want to just say a word about our future broadcasts. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, this is responding to requests of people in Oklahoma. Now, what I want is you to feel free to offer your ideas about suggestions for guests, for topics that you would like to see on the Hamilton Report. And we'll do our very best to make sure that happens, because it's our goal to inform, to educate, and hopefully even at times to entertain. I want to mention that our guest next week is coming at a very important time, because here we are in Oklahoma with yet one more interim study, again, about conversion therapy. This has been proven to be not only ineffective, but actually very harmful. And yet it seems to represent itself bigger and bolder season after season in our legislature. And so our guest next week is certainly this country's foremost authority on debunking the so-called ex-gay movement, so-called conversion therapy. Wayne Besson, who is the executive director of Truth Wins Out, now based in Philadelphia, will be my guest next Monday evening. And I hope that you'll make every effort to tune into that program, because I promise you it's one that you won't want to miss, especially if you have LGBTQ plus children, family members, friends, coworkers, because I want you to understand clearly just how damaging that is and continues to be. and why we must fight it in our next legislative session. Well, I see that we're just about out of time for this evening. I want to thank you again for spending half an hour with us, and I hope that we can count on seeing you again right here next week on the Hamilton Report. Until then, thank you for joining us. I'm Scott J. Hamilton. Have a great evening.